Join us at Walters on Friday night, October 10th at 7 p.m. for our end-of-season Nats Chat podcast party. As a way to enjoy the fact that the Nats helped spoil the Mets' September, the first beer is on the house.
Morning, everyone. Earlier this morning, the Washington Nationals officially announced that Paul Toboni has been named the club's president of baseball operations.
I'm stepping into this role with a clear vision, and that vision is to be the highest performing organization in all of sports. I want to help build something that becomes the envy of all of sports, right? Where we get, X amount of months and years down the line, and people are looking at this organization like, shoot, I want to be part of that organization. We have a lot of work to do. That's okay. We're going to embrace it.
And welcome to Nats Chat, along with MASNsports.com Nationals insider Mark Zuckerman. I'm Al Galdi, host of the Al Galdi podcast. This is the first installment of the podcast for the Nationals 2025-2026 offseason. What figures to be a busy offseason, at least in terms of the front office and managerial staff. We'll see about with players. But the first big event of this offseason happened on Wednesday morning, a 9 a.m. introductory press conference for Paul Toboni as Nats president of baseball operations. There was a lot to this presser, including 3 members of Nats ownership being at the dais for the presser: managing principal owner Mark Lerner, principal owner Edward L. Cohen, and principal owner Robert K. Tanenbaum, marking the first time in years that Nats ownership took questions in a session with reporters, although only Mark Lerner actually spoke. We have a good bit to unpack from this presser, but we first say thank you for listening. This Nats offseason will be doing episodes of the podcast as news warrants. The intro presser for Paul Toboni, clearly news that warrants an episode of this podcast. The Nats, in a post on X at 6 a.m. on Wednesday, officially announced the hiring of Paul Toboni as Nats president of baseball operations. That is about as early of a major announcement from a Washington, D.C. area team that I can ever remember, 6 a.m. on Wednesday. But I thought it was good that the Nats did this early in the day. I know that there probably were religious reasons for this, but this was a way to own the morning sports news cycle in the D.C. area. So smart on the Nats for doing things the way that the team did do things. The presser lasted for nearly 30 minutes. And Mark, the presence of not one, not two, but 3 members of Nats ownership at the table for the presser. We weren't sure if even one person from ownership would be speaking at the presser. 3 people ended up being present for the presser up on the dais there. Were you surprised to see that?
I was surprised that it was all 3. I was thinking to myself that, are they going to find a way to not put themselves in that kind of position where they have to field questions? And I kept coming back to, I don't know how you could do that. When you make a hiring of this consequence and something they had not done in 17 years, I don't know how you could just put Paul Toboni up there and not have to do anything yourself to subject yourself to questions and answers. Now, I would have figured that it would be Mark Lerner alone, that, his brothers-in-law, Ed, Cohen, and Bob Tanenbaum would be up there. Was a surprise to me. Now, as you pointed out, those 2 didn't actually say anything. They sat there the whole time. There were, out of the, about a dozen to 15 maybe total questions in the press conference. Maybe that's more than it was. Maybe it's more like 10 to 12. There were only 2 directed at the owners, one from Barry Svrluga of the Post. He directed his straight to Mark Lerner. And then I had one that I addressed to Mark, but I also said, Ed and Bob, if you'd like to chime in, would be great to hear your thoughts on it as well. And Mark just handled both of those. So it was something. I don't know when we're going to get that opportunity again. I would have loved to ask more. I had more questions on my list. I would have loved to ask any of them. But we did get some bits of information out of them. And more than anything else, just kind of some on-the-record statements about what they're doing and what they're trying to do and where they're trying to go with the franchise, which is more than we've gotten from them in a long time. But beyond that, you can see how Paul Toboni impresses people and how he would have impressed them. It was an impressive showing for him. This is a 35-year-old who's worked his way up over the last decade with the Red Sox through their scouting department and their front office. He's got an MBA from Notre Dame. He's got a wife and 4 young boys between the ages of 1 and 6, and they were all there seated in the front row. That's a lot to have on your plate at age 35. And now On top of all that, he's the president of a Major League Baseball organization. But the way he conducted himself, the way he answered questions, the way he handled everything said to me, this is somebody who looks like he's up to the job. Now, we'll see. There's nothing to go off yet except his words and the owner's words. But for what this was and what they were trying to accomplish with this, I think they did it well. And I think Paul Toboni in particular came across very well in his first introduction to the Nationals fan base.
No, I agree. He spoke well. He was calm. He was in control. He did a good job of saying things while also saying nothing at times, not committing to anything, which I think is very smart and the way that you want to be. Read the press release put out by the Nats early Wednesday morning on the hiring of Paul Toboni. Quote, widely regarded as one of the best young executives in baseball, Toboni will bring a fresh voice to the organization, providing valuable experience in scouting and player development to build around the Nationals' talented core of young star players. Toboni comes to the Nationals from the Boston Red Sox, where he most recently held the title of Senior Vice President, Assistant General Manager. In his time with Boston, Toboni oversaw player development at the major and minor league levels, as well as the MLB first-year player draft, and was one of the key voices in the organization's larger baseball operation strategy. Toboni is credited with modernizing Boston's draft and player development process, integrating traditional scouting and coaching with data-informed decision-making, end quote. And that last sentence should be music to the ears of every person listening to this podcast. That is exactly what the Nats need. Toboni, in so many ways, is just what the doctor ordered for the Nats. But there is a big question lurking over all of this, and that is spending from the Lerner ownership group. Is Paul Toboni going to have the resources to do as needs to be done? This was a topic during the presser, spending from ownership. And the topic came up a few times in a few ways. We had this exchange between Nats insider Spencer Nussbaum of the Washington Post and Paul Toboni.
I'm curious what sort of assurances you've gotten in terms of latitude for spending, hiring, all those kind of processes. What sort of assurances you've been given and how that influenced your decision to take the job here?
Yeah, more than anything, like what I can point to is that I'm in this seat right now for a reason, right? And throughout the interview process and, even after accepting the job, I've felt incredibly supported. And, that's the main thing. I continue to feel that support. And, that will allow us to build a world-class organization, which is what the goal for all of us will be.
Okay, so that was a rather short answer from Paul Toboni on what he has been told by the Lerner Group about assurances regarding spending, although he did say that he feels very supported. Later in the presser, we had what Mark alluded to earlier, this exchange between Barry Svrluga, columnist for the Washington Post, and Mark Lerner.
Mark, what, in your conversations with Paul, what assurances did you give him from ownership that he would have the resources to build a modern front office and pay a competitive payroll like you paid when you were in the playoffs all the time?
We all gave him assurances, I would say that. The family is determined to get back to where we were a few years ago. We're going to do what it takes. We're going to do that in conjunction with sitting down with Paul when he's ready and saying, I didn't need to do this and need to do that. And we'll take it from there. This is not a decision that has to be made today. But we will be there, and we're going to get back to where we know we should be.
All right. So I'm interested to hear what you thought about Mark Lerner's answer to that question from Barry Svrluga, because I did not find that to be some supremely encouraging answer from Mark Lerner. Quote, this is not a decision that has to be made today, end quote. That was not a go get 'em, yeah, we're now going to be spending properly kind of answer that you wanted to hear. Now, Lerner did say, quote, we're going to get back to where we know we should be, end quote. So he did say that. That would seem to be about player payroll. Didn't address, though, the infrastructure aspect of the question from Barry. What did you make of what Mark Lerner said there?
Yeah, I think it was kind of intentionally vague, and it fit in with a lot of the things that we heard when that sort of subject came up. And, it's important to point out that when Mark Lerner was asked about and when Paul Toboni was asked about, commitment and resources, that it encompassed both spending on major league players, but also assembling a front office and a coaching staff and the whole organization with the kind of resources that you would like to have. Now, Paul Toboni starts off his whole thing by saying he wants to build this into an organization that is the envy of all organizations across all sports. That was a very bold thing to say right off the bat. Now, if you have that vision, you are saying that this is going to be an organization that spends money, that spends it wisely, and ultimately has success. So reading between the lines, I got the sense that he believes that he's going to have the ability to do what he wants to do. And in his answers to questions about, what he learned from the ownership family, without going into specifics, did make it seem like he heard what he needed to hear from them. I thought it was very telling that he said they were very comfortable in Boston. They didn't necessarily feel, he and his wife feel like they had to move on. He had heard good things about the Nationals, but he said he didn't really know anything about ownership. And sitting down multiple times with them, he came away convinced that this is the team that he wanted to run. So I think that says a lot. Now, as we know, talk is cheap. They can say whatever they want. The proof is going to be in what is actually done. And there have been a handful of times over the last several years, the few occasions that Mark Lerner has said things publicly, where he has said things to the effect of, this is under Mike Rizzo, hey, when Mike comes to me and says he wants to do this, he knows he has the resources to do it. Now, did that happen? Didn't seem like it. And I'm pretty sure that Mike Rizzo didn't just sit back and say, yeah, it's okay. I'm fine with having one of the smallest payrolls in baseball. Give me $5-6 million to spend on each free agent. That's good enough. I don't think that was the case. So I do have reason to believe that he wanted more and wasn't given it. Does that change now? Again, I've got to believe that if I'm Paul Toboni and I took this job and did all the research that I could get my hands on and firsthand knowledge from talking to the family themselves over the last several weeks, that he came away from it believing that they're going to be true to their word and offer him what he thinks he needs. But I also do think it was telling that he said, and Mark to a certain extent also said, that yes, they intend to get this team back to where it once was and that it's going to be this hugely successful organization, but they were all very careful about putting any kind of timetable on that. And it sounded to me more like they're thinking long-term vision than short-term. Now, they weren't ruling out the chance of, number one, winning, and number two, spending in 2026, 2027, or whatever timeframe you want to put on that. But it felt to me, reading between the lines, that they were talking more about where this is going to be in the bigger picture long-term than in the immediate. And I think that would be the part that would be frustrating, I'm sure, for a lot of fans and others to hear out there. But deep down, it might be the right answer anyways, given the state of the organization. There's an acknowledgement that they've got a long way to go, that this is not going to be as simple as adding $50 million to the payroll and putting a winning team on the field next year.
No, and the quick fix is not the proper approach. This program is broken, to be quite honest with you, and it needs to be fixed. I like so much of what we are reading about and hearing from Paul Toboni, but I think we all get that none of this matters if the Lerner Group doesn't spend more on infrastructure and players. And I think it's important to keep emphasizing that infrastructure and players. I think spending on infrastructure matters more than spending on players. When we saw that Lerner, Cohen, and Tanenbaum were going to be at the table for this presser, I was so hoping that this was going to be sort of an announcement, a proclamation of we are all in on owning this team. It's going to be different now. We recognize where we have gone wrong. We're going to be doing things properly in terms of spending. And you don't have to say it in that way. You don't have to be, as direct as I just was right there. But the idea was this is something different, especially, Cohen and Tanenbaum. Most people don't know who they are. So to sort of put them out there like that was maybe saying, hey, here we go. This is ownership. We are here to stay. We're not selling the team. We're all in on Paul Toboni and supporting him in any way possible. We didn't get that at this presser. We did not get anything close to that at this presser. And so I did find that aspect of this disappointing.
For those interested in learning a new language, whether it be Spanish, French, or something else, check out Babbel. Babbel's 10-minute lessons are quick and handcrafted by over 200 language experts, ready to get you talking about your new language in just 3 weeks. because talking is the key to really knowing any language. Designed by real people for having real conversations, Babbel gets you talking. With over 16 million subscriptions sold, Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by a 20-day money-back guarantee, so no pressure. Get up to 55% off at Babbel.com/NatChat. That's spelled Babbel.com/NatChat. Babbel.com/NatChat. That's spelled Babbel.com/NatChat.
As it relates to the general manager position, these folks have been great in their support with me, where if it's something that I think is in the best interest of the organization, we can do it, right? At the same time, I don't think it's a definite yes or no at this point in time. What I would say about Mike, and I've told Mike this prior to me accepting this job, I had about 10 people reach out just saying unbelievable things about him as a person and as a baseball mind. I told him he was shooting 10 for 10 from the line. This is before I even met him. And I think, in my early interactions with him, once again, it's just been 2 or 3 days. I see a lot of that. I think the world of him.
We also, by the way, got a non-committal answer from Paul Toboni on hiring a general manager. He didn't say that he isn't hiring a general manager, but he also didn't say that he is. And it kind of sounded like, well, we'll talk about that with ownership and see if that's a part of what we're allowed to do. That's kind of what I heard when Paul Toboni answered that. Now, he said some very nice things about interim GM Mike DeBartolo, but also did not commit to anything regarding DeBartolo. So, the reporting of the Nats are going to have a president of baseball ops and a GM, maybe they are, but there's no guarantee of that.
No, and I don't remember if it was in the press conference or later on. He came back after doing some other one-on-one interviews with radio and TV, came back into the room for kind of a scrum session with the reporters again, and that question came up again. So it may have been during that, which fans would not have had access to see. It basically was non-committal in saying that he has worked for the Red Sox for the last 10 years and seen how they structure their front office. And he's worked for multiple people in charge there. That's worth noting. And that for the better part of that time, they've had someone in the top role. I think currently they call Craig Breslow the chief baseball officer. And then they also have had someone below them who is referred to as the GM. So that's the organizational model that he knows and is probably most comfortable with, but openly saying, I don't know yet if that's going to be the right thing to do here. Now, did he say that because he was told, or he has reason to believe he may not have the resources to do that? Or if he does want to do that, it's going to come at the expense of something else? I don't know. Or was it simply him saying, this is all still new? He did on many occasions kept saying, I've only really been in the job for 2-3 days here. I'm just getting to know all these people. It's going to take some time to sort through all that and figure it out. I don't know which, angle of that he was coming from. Maybe it's a combination of both in some way. I'm sure he ultimately is going to be given a budget to do with as he feels fit, but that may involve some sacrifices. And yeah, I can do this, but I can't do that. And so he's going to have to figure out where that all works. I think we know the track record that would make you believe that it's more likely not going to be the case of a huge influx of resources available to him that have not been there in recent years. So it may be something that happens more down the road than anything. As for DeBartolo, spoke really highly of him, said that he heard from like 10 different people before he even got the job officially, just praising DeBartolo. And in the little bit of time he's had to get to know him the last couple of days, has really enjoyed it. And even did use the phrase, I'm excited to work alongside him. So I took that to mean that one way or another, no matter what the role officially is, the title of the job that he's staying, I did follow up with him later on that and said, am I reading that correctly? And he was a little more careful and said, well, we don't know yet about that. He seems great. I've heard nothing but great things, but we're all still starting this process. So I do believe this guy's head is spinning and this whole world is changing on him and it's all happening very fast. And I appreciate in some ways that he probably wants to make sure he's doing the right thing and taking a proper amount of time to do all that. But does this tie into the larger question of what he's allowed to do, what he's given the resources to do? I don't know the answer to that, except I'll keep coming back to this. They can say all they want. The proof is going to be in what they actually do. And we're going to find out over the next few months how much they are allowing him to do and how much he may be restricted in what he can do.
It is worth noting this presser happened 1 week to the day of the news breaking that the Nats had settled on Toboni as the head of baseball operations. So he has had at least a little bit of time to think about, what he would like to do. And I do wonder how much of this is him still trying to figure out what he will be allowed to do from a financial standpoint. I found this exchange telling from the presser. This exchange between Nats insider Jess Camerato of Nationals.com and Paul Toboni.
When you look at this Nationals team, what strikes you the most about this roster?
I think more than anything, we have some young, exciting players, right? I've been in touch with a number of them to date, and they're fun to watch. And I've told, many of them, while I haven't had the chance to reach out to everyone, I've told many of them, and I really believe it, I think there's another gear to tap into with many of them. And so it's not just that they're already really talented players, right? It's that it's easy for me to see a world a year or two down the line where we're seeing a different caliber of player in a good way.
Okay, so Paul Toboni on the Nats promising young players, quote, "I think there's another gear to tap into," end quote. And I heard that, and I'm guessing a lot of people heard that, and right away went to the coaching and development of these promising young players needs to be a lot better. And that's what Paul Toboni was saying right there when he said that. I don't know if he was trying to communicate that or not, but that's certainly how it came across, that the people involved with player development, the coaches, very much on notice here, because Toboni thinks that a lot more can be gotten out of the Nats promising young players.
Yeah, I got that out of not just that answer, but several others along the way. He did speak, and again, I can't remember if this was before or afterwards, in the breakdown session afterwards, but he did speak about the importance of coaching. And as he said, there are coaches who are fantastic at instruction, but maybe don't have the analytics background or the ability to translate that for them, and vice versa. And ideally, you want those who have both qualities. And so I definitely read into all of it that he believes strongly in coaching and having the right people. And yeah, he absolutely likes that core group of young talent that they have here. And, he named several of them later on: James Wood, CJ Abrams, Mackenzie Gore, Dylan Cruz, Dalen Lyle. I may be forgetting another name that he mentioned in there. So he sees the talent for sure. And I'm sure he sees the potential for even more out of all of them, and acknowledges that it's not just about assembling the most talent, but it's about getting the most out of them and helping them all to realize their full potential. So I certainly gathered from this that he believes strongly in coaching, and that doesn't just apply at the big league level. He really spoke a lot about having a consistent organizational philosophy at every level, from the very bottom of the minor leagues all the way to the top. These are big, grand divisions. It's not easy to implement. It takes time to implement that. But I got that from him as well, that he wants the quality of coaching and instruction and use of analytics and technology and all that stuff to be consistent from the day they get into the organization all the way through the last day they've played for this team at the major league level.
And one of the things that I do really like about Paul Toboni is that he does seem to be this very healthy combo of analytics and scouting. It's not one or the other. It never has been one or the other. The straw man's argument that people have set up for years of, you can't just go by the numbers. No one's saying that you need to do that. You want to do both well. And Toboni has a background that suggests that he believes in doing both well. What he did with the Red Sox in terms of drafting and player development. And you mentioned his education. He earned an MBA from Notre Dame with a specialization in finance and analytics. So that word is actually on his resume in terms of his education. So, love seeing that. Very excited about Paul Toboni. It is just a question of, is he going to be allowed to do as he sees fit? When it comes to the managing situation, I know he did address that. What did you think of what he had to say about that? And, it has been like a whirlwind in recent days. All of these managers around MLB who have become available, Bruce Bochy, Brian Snitker, Rocco Baldelli, Ron Washington. I'm not saying that all or even any of these guys would be right for this situation or would even necessarily want to come here. But man, you have some options right now if you're going shopping for a manager.
Yeah, Bob Melvin also on that list now. I asked Toboni, this was in the follow-up session, about the managerial process and hiring process. And he said, first and foremost, he's been in touch with Miguel Cairo, but he is planning very soon to have a real heart-to-heart conversation with him. And he did not want to discuss the process of hiring a manager until he's done that first.
So I've been texting back and forth with Miguel, right? What I didn't feel comfortable with is sharing something with you all that I haven't talked with Miguel about. You know, like I said, it's been 48 hours since I took the job. So I want to sit with Miguel and learn him as a person. You know, more than anything, I want him to understand my vision for the role before sharing it with everyone. So hopefully you can respect that.
Now, you could read that two ways. You could read that as, I want to give this guy the opportunity to make his own case because he's already sort of in the position, and I want to determine that he is a candidate for it, or in theory that I'm just going to be hiring him. I tend not to think in those terms. I think it's more likely that he wants to be able to tell Miguel Cairo, thank you for your service. Yes, we may interview you as a candidate for the job, but maybe in more likelihood, we're going to start a full process here and interview a bunch of candidates. And, you know, we appreciate what you did, but we're kind of starting over here. My guess is it's more likely in that area. And so he doesn't want to be talking about hiring a new manager until he's told the quote unquote current manager that he's not being retained. We'll see. Hopefully we learn more about that coming up. But I'm really interested to see where that all goes because, as you said, there are some experienced names, and there's a valid argument that what this team right now needs is somebody with experience and a track record who can walk into that clubhouse and command instant respect. I would buy the argument for that 100%. I would also buy the argument that if this is not a team that believes that it's positioning itself to try to win big right away in 2026, we don't know that for sure, but again, reading between the lines, it seems like they're thinking long-term versus short-term, and knowing that you may be working with a limited budget in some regards. Are you going to go and get somebody in theory who costs more and has the track record, and somebody who's going to want a job where they believe they have a chance to win right away, as opposed to somebody who's told, you're taking over a very young team, trying to mold them into winners. We want you to be the guy that ultimately wins with this team, but it may not happen right away. And usually in those cases, you're talking about a first-time manager, a younger person who's maybe somebody's bench coach, third base coach, works in an organization, AAA manager, those kinds of things. So we'll see as the names start to trickle out of what types of candidates they're looking at. I'm guessing it's more likely that a first-timer with maybe names that don't stand out as much on first glance. If we hear that they're talking to bigger names who've done it before, guys who are all of a sudden available, that does tell me a little bit different about what their mindset is for 2026 and maybe where those resources are going to go right away.
Yeah, and if you are going to do more with analytics, you tend to want a younger manager because he will be more agreeable, whereas a veteran manager might combat you on some things when it comes to that. But I have to tell you, there is something very appealing off what we have seen with this team and these players. If the Nats brought in like a Bruce Bochy and paid him what he wanted and just said, Bruce, have at it and do with these guys as you see fit. And, you know, I think there's a lot of good that could come from something like that. But Bochy would have to want to come here, of course, and the Nats would have to be willing to pay him what he would want. And, you know, that goes back to what we talked about with ownership. If you want a big name manager, you can't pay him less than $1 million as Davey Martinez was getting as recently as just a few years ago. Like, you have to be open to paying a manager a decent amount of money if you want a name guy. And, you know, that brings me to this too with Toboni. You know, we don't know what he's getting paid, but I do find at least somewhat encouraging. In order to pry him away from Boston, I would think he's making decent money, right? I mean, if you're Paul Toboni, you're not coming here for, say, $1.2 million per year. Like, you're coming here for multiple millions of dollars per year, maybe even more than that, maybe, you know, $3, $4, $5 million per year. MLB is very secretive about what executives make. We hear more about what managers make. We don't often hear about what executives make, but that would be interesting to know. What is Toboni getting? Because I would think it's decent money. Otherwise, why would he have left Boston to come here?
I agree. I think it's probably somewhere, I don't know the range, but on the higher end, when you also consider the title of president of baseball operations as opposed to a GM. I don't know if it's uniform across all of baseball, but I know a lot of the positions, lower positions in front offices, they all have the same rankings. There's, director and vice president and president, all these different things. And it's supposed to be fairly consistent across the major leagues so that when people move from one franchise to another, the salary structures are somewhat in the same range. And you're allowed to interview somebody to come from their team to your team if it includes a promotion to a higher level. So a short way of saying I would guess that it's not just a minimal, I'm going to guess he's not one of the lowest paid GMs or president of baseball operations in baseball because of that. I'll also say that my understanding was that Mike Rizzo was among the higher paid GMs in baseball with his last deal that he signed. Now, experience has a big part to do with that, but you already had that kind of money committed to your GM, head of baseball operations. In theory, that's just passing on that money to the new person or a portion of that. But even if it's just a portion of that, it might still be a decent amount. And just real quick to go back to the manager thing, what you're saying about an experienced guy, I've been thinking about this recently. The Cincinnati Reds, who I'd put in kind of a similar position to the Nationals over the last couple years. They rebuilt, they tore it down, they started over. They had a lot of young talent. They were hoping to make that leap and didn't quite get there. They took a step back last year. They decided to hire a new manager this year. And who did they get? Terry Francona, World Series winning manager, had success with multiple franchises, not necessarily the kind of lower level or first time no name manager you might think a team like that in a relatively small market would hire. They went big and hired Terry Francona, and look where they are in the playoffs. Now, they won 83 games. They barely got in, and they got smoked by the Dodgers in game one. But they're there. The Nats would love to be in that position. I'm not saying that's the way they're going to go, but it did strike me as an organization that I think of somewhat in similar terms in the way they've operated and where they are in their development the last few years. And that's an example of you don't have to go get the first timer. You can go get an established guy if you can convince him to come. And clearly it made a difference, helped lift them up over the top and make it to October. Make Walters your spot for this NFL season. All indoor TVs are preset and are first come, first serve. They're proud to show every NFL game every week.
Someone gave me some advice a while back, and it's move the big rocks first, right? And then you can kind of pick up the pebbles at a later date. So right now, I've only been in the organization for a couple days, but what I've started to try to prioritize, and what I'm going to continue to prioritize is getting to know people, right? What I said, I really meant, right? Like, you win with people.
The owner and executive producer of this podcast, Tim Shover, sent us a note that, according to him, and he was there, Derek Law was the only active player in attendance at the presser. From what you saw, did you see any other Nats players there? And should we make anything of the lack of a real presence from Nats players at this Paul Toboni presser?
Ryan Zimmerman was there. Obviously, he's not an active player, but he's a very important player with them. Derek Law, I believe, was there because he is still going through rehab, and he has to do that somewhere. And for now, he's still here in D.C. So I think he was already in the neighborhood, so to speak, and figured, let me come to this. He's not, I guess he's under contract till the end of October, the end of the World Series. He's not signed beyond this year. So, not necessarily a current player. I wouldn't read too much into that. It would be nice for like a James Wood who lives here anyways to stop by. Sure, that'd be a great look. I don't know if that was broached with him or if he even realized that that's something to do. So I don't read too much into that one, but Toboni has reached out to several of the players already. He didn't name exactly who. I would hope that James Wood is one of them because he is such an important part of the future. But yeah, Zimmerman was there. Derek Law was there, but I think that was more good timing than anything having to do with Derek himself and his role within the organization.
So we'll see what's next here. if the Nats are going to hire a GM, you'd think that that would happen at some point in the next month, although, nothing is certain. Obviously, there's the managerial issue to be decided on. There then will be a coaching staff issue to be decided on. Different MLB teams structure front offices in different ways. I don't think you have to have a president of baseball ops and a GM, but I will say this about this circumstance. There's so much to do that there probably would be a real benefit to Toboni having a GM who can handle the day-to-day transactional duties of the front office so that Toboni can focus on the big picture stuff that needs fixing. Otherwise, if all of that is on the plate of Toboni, that's a lot for him to try to handle this offseason. All of the big picture stuff that needs fixing in addition to the day-to-day transactions that go with being a GM.
I agree, and I think that's where Mike DeBartolo really fits in as somebody who already knows the organization up and down. And that kind of was his role even under Mike Rizzo. He had the vice president and assistant GM title. He did a lot of the transactional stuff, the day-to-day stuff that you're referring to there. So whether that's DeBartolo getting the formal title or being convinced to return in an assistant GM or special assistant, whatever you want to call it, capacity, I think it would make a lot of sense. And I think it also speaks to the rest of the front office. There were a bunch of them there at the press conference, including DeBartolo. It was interesting to see him there and like sitting in the back of the room. Can only imagine what was going through his mind watching all of this. But there are several others who've worked with them for a good number of years, some of them more recently, but sort of that top tier of assistants who used to work underneath Rizzo and really made the organization run top to bottom. They're all still here. They're all really waiting to see what their future is. If you're Paul Toboni, you can have grand visions of changes you want to make and a big picture of what kind of organization you want to assemble. But it's hard to do that in short order. And you can't wait too long. There's a lot of stuff that has to be done right now to prepare for the next season. So I do wonder if it makes sense to retain several of these front office types, assistant GM types, directors of different departments for now, and let them run the team and operate things the way they know as he gets to know them, start to evaluate them, and then eventually, whether that's later this winter or even next year, make decisions about their long-term futures. I think it's a big question. If he's Dave Dombrowski stepping in to run the Nationals, he's already got all this experience and he's got people that he knows and trusts to bring in. I don't know that Paul Toboni has that yet as a 35-year-old who's never done the job before. It would make a lot of sense to me to want to keep at least some of those institutional people there to run the organization while you, as you said, focus on the big things.
Well, and something that you do see in sports sometimes is, okay, new front office is put in place. You don't see the full effect of the change until the second offseason of that new front office, because the first year is kind of a transitional year. And then it's in year two that the new person in charge can really put his stamp on, okay, this is what I want. I now recognize exactly what I want and how I want it. So maybe it isn't until next offseason that we truly get to know what Paul Toboni is envisioning here. Hey, an early happy 60th birthday to Mike Puglisi, a lifetime Nats and Nats Chat fan, from his kids who want to thank him for instilling in them the love of baseball, for never missing a game, and for loving them no matter the score at the end. So we say happy birthday to Mike, an eventful offseason for sure, and hope Mike has a great and happy 60th birthday. You tell us what you think. A lot to digest from this Paul Toboni intro presser. You can email us, natschatpodcast@gmail.com. We are on X @Nats_chat. We are on Blue Sky @NatsChatPodcast. Mark and I are on X @Mark Zuckerman @AlGaldi. We have a website you could check out too, natschatpodcast.com, at which you can purchase a Nats Chat Podcast t-shirt. So, as mentioned, as news warrants this Nats offseason, we will be with you with episodes of this podcast. We look forward to that. And we look forward to the Nats Chat Podcast Party, Walters, Friday night, October 10th at 7 p.m. Are you properly prepared for yet another year of the Nats Chat Podcast Party?
Well, I'm prepared for, I'm sure, a lot of questions from everyone who attends, both about the state of the organization and maybe some personal questions for you and I about our futures as well. I missed the opportunity. Maybe I should have invited Paul to join us at this, because that would be a wonderful experience. He talked about wanting to get to know the city. He's a big basketball fan and like a high school hoops junkie who grew up in San Francisco, but he was talking authoritatively about like the local Washington area basketball programs and wanting to take his kids to those games. And, you know, this may be someone we see around town, not just confined to the office at Nats Park. That would be great. Maybe I should have extended the invite to him to come down to Walters next Friday.
Maybe Paul will be there anyway. Who the heck knows? But Paul, you are more than welcome to show up. Mike DeBartolo, you are more than welcome to show up. And you know what? Mark Lerner, Ed Cohen, Bob Tanenbaum, we'd love for you guys to show up, and we'd love to talk some baseball with you. All right, for Mark Zuckerman, I'm Al Galdi. We thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time on the Nats Chat podcast.
Give you an update on Jaden. He has been medically cleared by the doctors. He'll practice full today. As far as other injuries and practice updates, we'll put out the injury report later today. And also want to give a big shout out and a welcome to Paul Toboni and the Nationals, and definitely pulling for those guys, I believe, as he's got started today.